You said recently in a speech that if we keep having these terrible differences that we have, we will destroy each other. We have to find a way how to live together.
Yeah.
I spoke to one of the Republican candidates, former Governor Asa Hutchinson of Arkansas, who said to me, give the candidates a chance to talk about the issues that the Americans are concerned about. Let's use appropriate language. Let's be clear that we have differences of policy, but that doesn't always make the person on the other side an evil person or somebody that doesn't love our country.
Right.
Do you think the Republicans will coalesce around that kind of message?
No. There's no evidence that that's where their head is at right now. Now, that doesn't mean that that's not attainable over time. Look, it wasn't that long ago that I got a lot of Republican votes. It wasn't that long ago where John McCain was the Republican nominee and actively shut down a speaker at a town hall who was saying that I was a illegal alien bent on imposing Sharia law on the United States. And there are still a bunch of folks who are more politically conservative than I am on social issues, on economic issues, but who I consider good people, thoughtful people, who I learn from and who I enjoy conversations with. And so the polarizations that we've seen in our national politics is not identical to what's happening on the ground. But what is true is that partly because of where people are getting information these days, the siloing of information. If you are watching Fox News, I've said this before, if you're watching Fox News or following some right-wing radio host or getting Facebook feeds within that bubble, your reality is different than if you read the New York Times or watch your program. And when people are getting such fundamentally different facts, or what they think to be facts, and their worldviews are so skewed in one direction or another, then it's very hard for democracy to work. So this is the reason why I've been spending a lot of time both in the foundation and in other work talking about these problems of misinformation, not just the kind of misinformation that we see Putin engaging in the Ukraine situation, not just during election time, but just this constant demonization of the other side, making people fearful of each other. And unfortunately, I think that's going to be a problem that gets even more pronounced with the advent of AI and deep fakes and all these challenges.
And we want to talk about that a lot with the leaders in the second part of this program. And I just wanted to ask you before I got to them finally, race. Yeah. You're the first black president. When Trump was elected, somebody who used to work for you and now is an analyst, Van Jones, said white lash. It was the white lash against a black presidency. Do you think the white lash is receding? And I guess combined with that, how do you interpret two candidates of color, Nikki Haley, former governor of South Carolina, Tim Scott, senator of South Carolina, who is saying that Obama wants to keep essentially race as part of the equation, a part of the the conversation, and you don't believe that everybody has an equal chance in the United States, no matter what their color?
Well, look, I won't comment on what Republican candidates say. I'm not running, so they can they can find other ways to occupy their time. I think race has always been the fault line in American life and American politics. That's not original to me. I think any observer of America would say that. And by the way, that historically has not sort of been a one-sided partisan issue. My favorite president, Abraham Lincoln, did an awful lot to advance the cause of freedom, and conversely, the Democratic Party was where the Dixiecrats resisted civil rights and progress for years and imposed Jim Crow. So it is something that America has had to grapple with for centuries. I think we have made real progress. And, although I was always skeptical that my election somehow signified a post-racial America, if you look at any speech I gave throughout my presidency, I was always someone who reminded the country of the progress that was possible. That was my brand, right? That's part of the hope and change thing. But what I've also always said about hope was it can't be blind hope. It can't be a willful ignorance to our history. We reckon with our history. That's how we then get better. That's how we perfect our union. In the same way that Germany got better when it looked squarely at what happened during World War II and came to terms with that. And that's part of why it is a thriving, stable, and increasingly diverse society. And that's part of the argument that I think all of us, not just in the United States or in Europe, but around the world, have to come to terms with. Humans have a strong desire to coalesce, particularly during times of stress, around tribe, clan, race, whatever our religious preferences are. And politicians have a good way of exploiting that. And if we don't resist it, then we're going to have problems. And by the way, it's not just that us-them dynamic is not just around race. I would argue that in the United States, and I suspect in Europe as well, changing gender roles have fueled at least as much of a backlash as the racial backlash. This enormous fear among men and those who like the traditional structures and hierarchies and patriarchy get very nervous when you have women suddenly being outspoken and thinking that they should have the same rights and power as men do. And when you have people of different sexual orientations saying, I'm here, I want a seat at the table. That has been very threatening. And there's one last ingredient that I'd be remiss if I didn't mention. I do think there's an economic element to our democracy that we have to pay attention to. Our democracy is not going to be healthy with the levels of inequality that we've seen generated from globalization, automation, the decline in unions, obscene inequality. You think about news of the day. Generally, we're not talking about news of the day, but right now we have 24-hour coverage. And I understand it, of this submarine, this submersible that tragically is right now lost at the bottom of the sea. At the same time, right here, just off the coast of Greece, we had 700 people dead, 700 migrants who were apparently being smuggled into here. And it's made news, but it's not dominating in the same way. And in some ways, it's indicative of the degree to which people's life chances have grown so disparate. It's very hard to sustain a democracy when you have such massive concentrations of wealth. And so part of my argument has been that unless we attend to that, unless we make people feel more economically secure and we're taking more seriously the need to create ladders of opportunity and a stronger safety net that's adapted to these new technologies and the displacements that are taking place around the world. If we don't take care of that, that's also going to fuel the kind of mostly far-right populism, but it can also potentially come from the left, that is undermining democracy because it makes people angry and resentful and scared.